September 490 BC, on the plain of Marathon in Greece, a mighty Persian invasion force was waiting to go into battle against a small Greek army intent on saving their country, their freedom, and their way of life. After 4 days of stalemate, the Persian commander Datis decided to gamble everything on a quick victory. Under cover of darkness, he loaded all of his cavalry and some of his infantry back onto his ships. While the Athenian army was at Marathon, he would sail round the coast, land his troops, and attack the unprotected city of Athens. His faithful commander, Artaphernes, would stay at Marathon with a holding force of around 12,000 men. If Datis thought he could load thousands of horses and men onto his ships and sail quietly away into the night, he was very much mistaken. Miltiades' scouts uncovered the ruse.
The Greeks consequently realized here is a danger and an opportunity. The danger is if we don't act now, the city will be captured behind our backs. The opportunity is we can march down into the plain now and take them on because they won't have time to unship their cavalry again.
Miltiades had to move quickly. It would take Datis more than 10 hours to sail to Athens and several more hours to unload his army. Miltiades had to win a quick victory at Marathon and then march at full speed back to Athens to confront Datis.
What they did was seize what the Greeks called kairos. They had a word meaning opportunity, the opportune moment. And I think the genius of Miltiades is indeed largely responsible for their choosing the right moment.
Miltiades marshaled his 11,000 hoplites and readied them for battle. Greeks would normally have formed a rectangular phalanx, but he was worried by the length of the enemy battle line. The Persians could sweep around both sides and envelop the Greek army. We know this kind of detail because of two Greek historians. Herodotus, who wrote in the years after the battle and may even have met some survivors, and Plutarch, who wrote 400 years later but used material from earlier histories. Miltiades took a huge risk and tore up the battle manual. He abandoned the traditional phalanx formation and deployed his troops along the widest possible front, so that the center of the line was much thinner than usual, 4 men deep as opposed to the customary 8. But on each wing, he retained the 8 ranks of the conventional phalanx, wanted to protect his flanks.
The Greek heavily armored infantry, they had a 3-foot shield that would cover them from brow to knee, greaves down here on the shin guards, and then a helmet with just eye slits, so that when they put that helmet at the rim of the shield, they really were pretty much invulnerable.
As the Greek army rolled forward, Miltiades was already thinking of the next problem. The massed ranks of Persian archers, deadly at up to 300 yards. The Greeks would have to cover that final distance at speed, or risk being slaughtered.
They marched forward at a sedate pace, the usual sedate pace of a hoplite army advancing, until they came within bowshot, which is maybe 100 yards or so.
Once within bowshot, the Greeks came under a hail of arrows. Miltiades' troops broke into a run. This astonished the Persians. The phalanx, by its very nature, usually went into battle at a slow, steady pace.
The Persian archers would have posed a very serious threat to the hoplite force. They had very powerful bows and large arrows that could have done serious damage.
Imagine yourself in full armor, with a heavy shield, spear and sword, a total weight of 70 pounds, having to race to the enemy and be able to put up a strong fight when you reached him.
There was a British historian who actually built himself a suit of hoplite armor and went to Marathon and ran from approximately the place where the Athenian camp was to the site of the battle, and showed that a fit man could actually run that distance in armor.
The hoplites trained hard for this. There was even a hoplite event in the Olympic Games of the period, which involves sprinting over 400 yards in full kit and armor. The Persians were puzzled. From their ranks, all they could see was a long line of Greeks running down on them. Surely they would be out of breath before they even got close enough to fight. These Persian infantrymen were more skirmisher troops than heavy infantry. Lightly armed with short spears and scimitars, they formed ranks as a line of steel-tipped spears came hurtling towards them. The two armies clashed head-on. The Persians soon realized their weapons were hopeless against the Greek army, but they fought back valiantly, and by sheer weight of numbers began pushing the Greek center back. It looked like Miltiades' gamble had failed, and all the while Datis was sailing closer to Athens. It is 490 BC. The Greek army is being pushed back by Persian invaders, and a Persian fleet is on its way to attack Athens. As the Greeks fell back in the center, the Persian commander, Artaphernes, smelled victory.
The way in which Miltiades drew out the Athenian army, enormously lengthening and thinning his center, was one of the riskiest things, I think, in all of ancient warfare.
But now the strong Greek phalanxes, on the wings, beat back the thinner Persian line and began to push in towards the center. Each phalanx moved on command, as one unit, wheeling left or right, almost turning on a dime. Miltiades' gamble had paid off. As the center fell back, his wings slowly encircled the enemy. The slaughter began in earnest, as the heavily armored Greeks hammered into the Persian divisions.
And then that whole center of the Persian army became essentially a killing zone.
Certainly, to fight that way took great strength and great endurance, and you haven't even talked about the heat of the summer.
The Persians continued to throw themselves onto the attacking phalanx, desperately trying to find a way to break it. In the meantime, the Persian archers poured thousands of arrows into the Greek lines, now so closely packed with the Persian infantry that they were bound to hit their own soldiers. The Greeks felt that right and might were on their side and fought like men possessed.
Tactics were not so important in those days. It was more just the guts to stand next shoulder to shoulder with your mates and carry on the fight.
The Persians were a broken force. They had never been defeated by the Greeks. But now thousands of their soldiers lay dead or died. Suddenly the Persians broke and ran for their ships, desperate to escape the slaughter. The Greeks raced to cut off their retreat and chased them to the water's edge. There was chaos on the beach, the stampeding troops pushing and heaving to get their craft away, while trying to defend themselves from the pursuing hoplites. The surviving Persians sailed away, while the Greeks collapsed, exhausted in the sand. But there was no time to rest. While the battle was raging at Marathon, Datis and his Persian troops were sailing closer to Athens. Miltiades ordered his tired and battle-weary troops to Athens, a forced march of 22 miles in full armor. It had taken him just over 3 hours to defeat the Persian army at Marathon, but that meant that Datis was 3 hours closer to Athens. It was a race against time. He sent a runner on ahead with news of victory. According to legend, it was Phidippides, the same man who had run to Sparta. He ran the 22 miles here to Athens and shouted, "Rejoice, we have victory," then fell dead from exhaustion. Miltiades arrived in the nick of time and managed to set his troops up around Athens. Datis was dismayed when he sailed around the bay and found the Greek army waiting for him.
When they saw those Athenians waiting for them, they just didn't have the heart to have another go at these guys who had just inflicted this disastrous defeat on them.
He could not even land his army. He thought these troops had been beaten at Marathon, but now here they were, ready to fight again. Acknowledging defeat, he turned his ships around and set a course for Persia. Hippias had guessed right. Not only had he lost his tooth, but any chance of ever regaining his kingdom. And the Spartans? They turned up late and missed out on the glory, but were curious to see what a Persian soldier looked like. They marched on from Athens to inspect the dead.
They say that the Spartans were sort of like sightseers, toured the battle afterwards, and that they were pretty shaken up to see what great work their rival Athenians had done. I think it really did eat at the Spartans' guts, that these foppish Athenians had polished off the Persians.
Under cover of darkness, he loaded all of his cavalry and some of his infantry back onto his ships. While the Athenian army was at Marathon, he would sail round the coast, land his troops, and attack the unprotected city of Athens. His faithful commander, Artaphernes, would stay at Marathon with a holding force of around 12,000 men. If Datis thought he could load thousands of horses and men on September 490 BC, on the plain of Marathon in Greece, a mighty Persian invasion force was waiting to go into battle against a small Greek army intent on saving their country, their freedom, and their way of life. After 4 days of stalemate, the Persian commander Datis decided to gamble everything on a quick victory.